وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار أما بعد. My brothers and sisters in Islam, today's khutbah is a very simple khutbah. It is about the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is also called Dhikir of Allah, or remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As you know, we all lead very, very busy lives. The hustle and bustle of life could be such that at the end of the day, before you sleep, you could suddenly make the realization that you never remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your creator, not even once, apart from perhaps the 5 prayers. And even the 5 prayers, they're under threat of being rushed or even being abandoned. So the reality is, brothers and sisters, the busy lives we lead amongst Facebook and WhatsApp and Telegram and YouTube and so many other things, so many other distractions, it could be that through the whole day you never remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a calamity and this is a tragedy that we have forgotten to mention the one who has created the universe, the one who has created us, and then we forgot Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should know that anyone who truly loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the remembrance of Allah is never ever far from their mind. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has encouraged us as Muslims to remember Him time and time again. And from some of the ayat in the Quran, which encourage us to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with Allah ta'ala He says, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. That the Muslims, they remember Allah. In what position? They remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they are standing up. When they're walking around, they remember Allah. وَقُعُودًا. And when they're sitting down, they're remembering Allah. وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. And on their sides, when they're lying down at night to rest, they are still remembering Allah. So there is no single time or moment when the remembrance of Allah is absent from their minds. And Allah Ta'ala, He praises the people who remember Him time and time again. And says, وَالذَّاكِرِينَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا وَالذَّاكِرَاتِ أَعَدَّ اللَّهُ لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةً وَأَجْرًا كَبِيرًا. That the female and male slaves who remember Allah a lot, Allah has prepared for them a great forgiveness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has commanded us to remember Him. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ ذِكْرًا كَثِيرًا. You who believe, remember Allah a lot. And Allah Ta'ala has told us that if you remember Him, He will remember you. وَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ. Now remember me and I will remember you. So the concept of dhikr is central to our very existence as human beings, our very existence as Muslims. So in today's khutbah, the first khutbah, I wanted to mention some of the blessings of the dhikr of Allah. By making the dhikr of Allah, some of the blessings we will find in our lives. And in the second khutbah, I wanted to speak about some of the guidelines about how the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be made. The first thing about the dhikr of Allah, you can ask yourself this question, that how often in the day do you remember Allah? Every hour? Every 2 hours? Every 3 hours? Every day? Every month? How often do you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And you should know that the more you remember Allah, the stronger a sign it is that you have strong iman. If you're somebody who remembers Allah all the time, then this is a sign of very, very strong iman. And this is something you should be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, grateful for. And He has given you the blessing. Many people, they have good intentions, that I will remember Allah a lot, and they never get round to doing it. Conversely, if you find you never remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and your tongue does not glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a bad sign. And this is something which is in need of attention. So first of all, it's a sign of true iman. Secondly, it purifies the heart and gives the heart life. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the one who remembers Allah in comparison to the one who doesn't remember Allah is the difference between the living and the dead. So the one who is not remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is no point in his existence. At the end of the day, we were commanded, we were created to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I did not create the jinn or the man except to worship me, meaning to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the person who does not remember Allah, his heart is dead. And Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, one of the great scholars of Islam, he said that the one who does not remember Allah is like the fish that has no water. The fish that has no water will die. Similarly, the heart which has no remembrance of Allah, truly it will die as well. The remembrance of Allah also, it protects you from many enemies. Many people, they succumb to their desires. They are slaves of their desires. They are slaves of the temptations of the dunya. They are slaves even of the shaitan himself. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said in a beautiful hadith that the one who remembers Allah a lot, it's as though he entered a fortress. He entered an impenetrable fortress, which however much the enemy tries to enter this fortress, the enemy can never enter the fortress. Yesterday I was reading about one of the ulama. He was imprisoned because of his da'wah for 8 years. And he was asked that how did you cope in prison for 8 years? And he said, the adhkar, the remembrance of Allah I made after Salat al-Fajr every day, that helped me cope with 8 years in prison. So this dhikr of Allah is like a fortress. Whatever situation you are in, if you are strong in the remembrance of Allah, then Allah, He will protect you against so many things in this life. Also we should know, brothers and sisters, that dhikr, it removes the black rust on our hearts. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that every time a Muslim he sins, then a dot is placed on his heart. A bit like, I guess, when you smoke, your lungs become black. So similarly, your heart, it becomes black as a result of disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then eventually, the heart is full of rust and can no longer perceive the difference between right and wrong. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in the Quran, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ, that verily there is rust on their hearts because of what they used to do. So the dhikr of Allah, it removes these black spots from your heart. It gives life to your heart. The dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it also helps us trivialize the problems in this dunya. Sometimes we find that everyone has problems, financial, marriage, health, whatever. It might be people, they have problems. However, when you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahu Akbar, Allah is the greatest. When you put things in perspective, just by the dhikr of Allah, it may not remove your problem. However, what it can help you do is prioritize the problem. You know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is greater and He is infinite. And the problem is finite. The problem, one day, it will disappear. When you put things in the correct perspective by remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it helps you deal with this problem. Many psychological problems, of these kind of problems, they can be solved by the dhikr of Allah, by regularly remembering Allah. A big industry which has grown is the business of ruqya. Everyone's looking for a raqi. Everyone's looking for someone to read Quran upon them. Many a time you can read Quran upon yourself. When you go to the raqi, he may be a good reciter of Quran, but you can do it yourself. You can read the Quran upon yourself. You can remember Allah yourself, and there's no need to part with money or anything else. Just have iman and tawakkul, and inshallah Allah will cure you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has reminded us of the benefits of dhikr. And He said, "Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub," that in the remembrance of Allah, hearts find tranquility. So whatever problem you might have in your life, then remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will find that this problem may not be alleviated, but the problem, inshallah, it will be at the very least lessened. Another of the blessings of the dhikr of Allah is that it makes you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you ask yourself that, do you have a relationship with Allah? Do you feel that you are close to Allah? And many of the righteous people, they will say, yes. They will say that, yes, they are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the dhikr makes you feel that you have a living, live relationship with Allah. You believe that you have a communication, you have a line of communication with Allah, because you are always in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm sure many of the brothers and sisters here today, they have experienced this, that they feel that they have a closeness to Allah because of the dhikr of Allah upon their limbs and upon their tongue. The dhikr of Allah, it brings blessings to any gathering. Many a time we meet, we gather, and we never ever mention قال الله وقال رسول الله, that Allah said and His Messenger said. Many a time. This does not mean that every single gathering we attend has to become an Islamic lecture. Even when we sit with our families, just by mentioning one hadith, or by mentioning one small thing, like how about saying Bismillah? How many times a day do we eat, and how many times do people, they never say Bismillah? They never ever say Bismillah, even though Allah, He gave them this food. This is from the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You remember to say Bismillah. You remember to say Alhamdulillah at the end of a meal. So we can spiritualize any gathering. We can spiritualize any gathering by the remembrance of Allah. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said that whenever a group of people they gather and they make no mention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the gathering will be a source of regret for them on the Day of Judgment. Why? Because they wasted their time. When you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you put barakah in that gathering. That gathering becomes a useful gathering. We now live in an age and time where you rarely hear the mention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even I remember when I was at university many years ago, some of the brothers, they were very keen to give the khutbah, and they were keen to give political khutbahs. And many a time they would tell you about UN mandates and what George Bush said and what this person said, that person said, and they never mentioned one ayah of the Quran or one hadith. Even quite recently, one brother mentioned a khatib who gave a khutbah, and he said, you know that khatib last week, he didn't mention one ayah of the Quran or one hadith in the khutbah. Very, very important, brothers and sisters, not only in the khutbah, but in all gatherings we should try to spiritualize them. It doesn't have to be the entire gathering, but even a small percentage of our talk should remind us of our Creator, remind us of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even some of the madhahib, they said that the khutbah, it must include at least one praise of Allah and one salutations upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So these are the remembrances of Allah, and all our gatherings should have some remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The remembrance of Allah will be a shade on the Day of Judgment. A few months ago, I gave a khutbah about the 7 who will be shaded on the Day of Judgment, on a day when there is no shade apart from the shade of Allah. And one of those 7 is the man who cries out of the fear of Allah, and he is secluded, he is by himself, and he remembers the greatness of Allah, and he makes him shed tears. So this person, Allah will reward him because he remembered Allah not for showing off, rather sincerely for His sake. Also from the blessing, brothers and sisters, of the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I mentioned again in a khutbah a few weeks ago, is that it is heavy in the scales on the Day of Judgment. And the last hadith in the collection of Imam al-Bukhari is kalimatani habibatani ila rahman khafifatani ala lisan wa thaqilatani fil mizan subhanallahi wa bihamdi wa subhanallahi al-azim. But there are 2 words which are beloved to Allah, with ar-Rahman, and they are light on the tongue, and they are heavy on the scales. And they are to say, Subhanallah wa bihamdi, Subhanallah al-azim. So to remember this dhikr is heavy. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, tamla'u al-mizan, wa Subhanallah wa bihamdi, tamla'u ma bayna as-samawati wal-ard. That Alhamdulillah, it fills the scales on the Day of Judgment. And Subhanallah wa bihamdi, it fills what is between the heavens and the earth. So the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something very, very heavy on the scales on the Day of Judgment. Also from the benefits of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that it can be done anywhere. Did you know that dhikr of Allah can be done anywhere? Do you need wudu for the dhikr of Allah? The answer is no. You could even be in a state of janaba. You can even be on a state of menstrual cycle. Do you need to face the qibla? Do you need to face Makkah when you make the dhikr of Allah? The answer is no. Do you need to be wearing any specific clothing for the dhikr of Allah? The answer is no. Do you need to be in the masjid to mention Allah? The answer is no. The dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is free. Do you need to carry any equipment? Do you need to have any books with you? The answer is no. All of us, we know the simple adhkar of Allah. We know La ilaha illallah. We know Alhamdulillah. We know Subhanallah. We know all these phrases, brothers. But how many of us, we exercise our tongues in using these phrases? Many a time when I go to the post office or I'm standing in a queue, I look around me and watch the people. The seconds are counting, the seconds are passing by of your life, and how are people using their lives? While you stand in the queue in a post office or in a bank or wherever, in a few moments you can do something really amazing. Like the Prophet ﷺ, he said that whoever said La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir, 100 times. It is as though he freed 10 slaves. It is as though he wiped away 100 sins and earned 100 hasanat. And anyone he met on that day, nobody did more good deeds than him unless they did more than what he did. So that could be in the space of only 2 or 3 minutes. If you are standing in a queue, then you have done a huge amount of good deeds. And maybe in that day you will not meet anybody who has surpassed you in your amount of good deeds. The dhikr of Allah, it is a habit. The dhikr of Allah, it is something we need to do regularly. Always be conscious of your Creator, the one who created you and I. One of the most beautiful things about the dhikr of Allah is that it makes Jannah beautiful. Jannah is beautiful anyway, but I'm talking about your Jannah. When the Prophet ﷺ, he went on Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, the night journey, where he went to the heavens to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He met on the way, he met Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Prophet Ibrahim. And Ibrahim alayhi salam said to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that pass my salams to your ummah, that tell them, Assalamu alaikum. And then he said to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that tell your ummah that paradise, its earth, its soil is made of misk. Misk is like a perfume. And tell them as well that paradise is flat. The terrain is not rugged. The terrain is flat. However, it's very, very fertile, meaning that if you plant something in it, then it will grow. And he furthermore said that tell them that the plants of Jannah, what are the plants of Jannah? He said the plants of Jannah are to say, La ilaha illallah. The plants of Jannah are to say, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. That every time you say these phrases, then these trees are planted for you, for your paradise. So the person who is regular in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they will have luscious gardens. Their gardens will be full of these trees and plantations. These are beautiful hadith. We can encourage our children to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that every time you say this, then Allah will plant for you a tree in paradise. It's free. The dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free, and it requires no specific knowledge. All of us, we know these simple adhkar. So we see, brothers and sisters, that being a Muslim and the dhikr of Allah, they go hand in hand. We have to remember our Creator. This life is finite. We came from Allah and we will return to Allah. So let's remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a lot while we are in this dunya. Sallallahu sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulil kareem amma ba'd. I wanted to mention some rules about the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because, there are certain groups who they claim to have a claim on the dhikr of Allah, that they are the people of dhikr. However, there is no specific group which is engaged in dhikr more than any other group. Rather, all Muslims, we should be engaged in the dhikr of Allah. You don't need to join a certain gathering or a certain group to be of those people who make the dhikr of Allah. First of all, in the previous khutbah, I spoke about the dhikr of Allah being on the tongue. However, dhikr in Islam is wider than just the tongue. The dhikr can be within the heart. The heart, it fears, it trembles out of the fear of Allah. The heart, it has reverence for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The dhikr can be even in the heart, even when the tongue is not moving. The dhikr can be on the limbs, that every time you do a good action, when you go to the masjid, when you pray, when you give the zakat, when you do siyam, all of these actions, they are also dhikr of Allah. The dhikr of Allah, the remembrance of Allah, yes, it is primarily on the tongue, however, it is also in the heart and on the limbs as well. So every action of piety is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I wanted to mention an important point about dhikr. I came across quite a few brothers who, when they make the dhikr of Allah, they don't move their tongue. They don't move their tongue. You met those kind of people. People, they pray. And you ask them that, how did you pray? They said, I read Surah Al-Fatiha in my mind. You met those kind of people before? They read the Quran in their mind. This is totally wrong. The dhikr of Allah, it involves moving the tongue. Even in a silent prayer, like Surah Al-Dhuhr or Surah Al-Asr, when you have to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, because the Imam, he's not reciting aloud. In this kind of situation, you should recite Surah Al-Fatiha. The main thing is that your tongue, it moves. You don't need to make noise. However, your tongue, it must hit the points of articulation. It must hit the makharij. It must move within your jaws. The tongue must be moving. The dhikr is not dhikr until the tongue moves. There's nothing such as silent dhikr, where you're reading the Quran in your mind. I came across quite a few brothers who have this idea that they just think about Surah Al-Fatiha. This is incorrect. Rather, you must recite Surah Al-Fatiha. At the same time, you should not disturb the people. Sometimes you pray next to people and they're reciting so loudly that you cannot recite yourselves. So rather, you should follow the middle path. You move your tongue and you recite in a level such that you can hear yourself, but you do not disturb those around you. And that goes for all dhikr. All dhikr, the tongue moves. However, you don't make necessarily too much noise. We should know the best dhikr, brothers and sisters, dhikr is the Quran, the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the best dhikr. And after this, the best dhikr is that found within the sunnah, within the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This is, without any doubt, the best dhikr. These days you find people who have published books of dhikr. I'm sure you can find them in Bradford, in many, many places. And they claim that if you read this so many times, then you get that. And they have many, many claims. However, many of these claims, they are not substantiated. There is no hadith, and there is no qala Allah wa qala Rasulullah. So we should know that these claims, they are baseless. If somebody says to you, if you read this 500 times, you will get that. Then they may say that this is our experience, that I sat with my shaykh, and my shaykh, he did this, and this happened. Okay, that may well be the case. However, this is a bid'ah, this is an innovation. Rather, we should restrict ourselves to the dhikr in the Quran and the Sunnah. That if you are involved in mentioning certain types of dhikr in terms of numbers and places, then these should be found in the Quran and the Sunnah, and not just doing because some shaykh, he told you to recite this many times, that many times. Many of our people, they fall into these kind of movements. So try to stick to the Sunnah. And as one of the ulama, he said that if we spent all our lives just trying to follow the Sunnah, we wouldn't have enough life. There are too many things to do. So just follow the Sunnah, and there are many good books. One of the best books of adhkar, which are from the Quran and Sunnah, is Hisnul Muslim, on the fortification of the Muslim. It's not the only one. There are other books as well. However, it's a very famous book. And mashallah, all the du'as, they are authentic, and they are well referenced. So I recommend that the brothers and sisters try to have one of these books at home or with you, and you can find a du'a for waking up, for eating, for sleeping, for so many other things, and it will help you beautify your day, and it will increase your hasanat every day, day after day. Also, I wanted to mention that many people, they pass on these supplications without verifying. Nowadays, we live in the world of Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp and so many other things. You even receive chain messages that send this dhikr to 100 people. Don't break the chain, whatever you do, and then Allah will give you such and such. Don't pass on these messages until you have verified these messages. Otherwise, you are passing on misguidance. Rather, if somebody sends you an authentic hadith, like Imam al-Bukhari, he narrates a hadith that if you say this dua 100 times, then this happens, then that's fine. However, if you come across something you're not familiar with, then you shouldn't just pass it on blindly. I also wanted to mention speed dhikr. Have you ever heard of speed dhikr? These days, people, they make dhikr so quickly that the words, they have no meaning. Even if you knew Arabic, then the words, they would have no meaning. Rather, the more important thing is the quality over the quantity. So when you say subhanallah, take your time in saying subhanallah. Okay, people after the prayers, you see them on their fingertips, making the dhikr very, very quickly. This is the dhikr of Allah, so give it some time, give it an extra minute, and try to do it properly. Other things worthy of mentioning in dhikr is group dhikr. This is something else. In some Muslim countries, after the prayers, they always have group dhikr, where they sit together and they recite certain formulae in unison. Again, this is unfounded in the teachings of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rather, the general rule with dhikr is everyone makes their own individual dhikr in a low voice. There are certain exceptions to this, like on Eid, the Eid Takbir, you can raise your voice. But even then, it should be done individually. Another question which people always ask about dhikr is dhikr beads. That when you go on Hajj, you always bring back the zamzam, some dates, and don't forget the dhikr beads. So the dhikr beads is this, okay? We say that the dhikr beads, the best thing to do is to use your fingertips. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he would make dhikr on his fingertips. So this is the best way of making the dhikr. As for the dhikr beads, it's preferable not to use the dhikr beads if you can. Inshallah, it's not a bid'ah, however, it's preferable not to use them. So stick to the fingertips, and even there are some hadith that counting on the fingertips will testify for you on the day of judgment. So do this. Also worthy of mention regarding the rules of dhikr is not to mention the name of Allah by itself. Just make a dhikr, Allah, 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 Allah. This sentence has no meaning, Allah. When you say Allahu Akbar, it becomes a sentence. It becomes a sentence with meaning. So we shouldn't make these kind of self-styled dhikr. Rather, we should do dhikr which is from the Sunnah, and we should try to do as much adhkar as we can. Finally, I wanted to just mention one hadith, which is quite a nice hadith, which is when the Prophet ﷺ went to the companion Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu. He said to him, "Oh Mu'adh, I love you." He said, I love you. And then he advised him about something. He said to him, "Oh Mu'adh, after every prayer, say, Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik." That, Ya Allah, help me to make your dhikr and to thank you and to worship you in the best way. Always say this after every prayer. So we see here, brothers and sisters, that this dhikr of Allah, many people, they want to do it, but they can't do it. They don't have the tawfiq from Allah to do it. So Prophet ﷺ advised Mu'adh to ask Allah to help you to make Allah's dhikr. To ask Allah such that you can remember Him more and more. So we say, Allahumma inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Allah, help us to remember you and to thank you and to worship you in the best way. In conclusion, brothers and sisters, in this very basic khutbah, I want you to say that dhikr is an all-embracing term. It covers the remembrance in the heart, it covers the remembrance in the tongue, and it covers the remembrance on the limbs. And it should be part and parcel of your life. And no moment in your life passes apart from you are in the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you can never do enough dhikr. You don't need to be in a special group. You don't need to wear a special type of turban. You don't need to do anything. Rather, you lead your normal everyday life and you try to engage in the remembrance of Allah the best you can. The Prophet ﷺ said to a man who came to him and said that the rulings of Islam, they are too many for me. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, of course you have to do the obligatory duties. The obligatory duties you must do. But after that, in terms of optional duties, he said, just make sure your tongue is moist with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and nobody will do more than you. So it's very, very important that we increase in the remembrance of Allah. I leave you with the ayah in the Quran. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تُلْهِكُمْ أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَمَا يَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْخَاسِرُونَ. Thou you who believe, don't let your wealth and your children divert you away from the remembrance of Allah. Whoever does this, then on the day of judgment, he will be a loser. So even though engaging in wealth, gathering wealth, there's nothing wrong with this. And in engaging with your children, there is nothing wrong with this. However, do not make this make you overlook the more important struggle, which is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from the dhakireen wa dhakirat, make us of those who remember Him by day and by night. And you know, when you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it will help you have a husnul khatimah. I forgot to mention this, this is a nice story. And that is that when you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a lot, then at the end of your life, you will find it easy to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We all know the hadith that man kana akhiru kalamihi la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah. Whoever his last statement was to say la ilaha illallah, he will go to paradise. There's a sheikh from Saudi who used to come to the UK a lot. His name was Sheikh Abdul Salam al-Burjis. I met him once many years ago. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he was about 40 and he died in a car crash. One brother, he told me about this story. He died in a car crash. His car, I think he hit a camel. Anyway, the car, it rolled over and he died. When they found him in the wreckage, he was in the last moments of his death. And this is, when you remember Allah a lot, then it becomes a subliminal action. The body is very, very weak. You can still push yourself to make the dhikr of Allah. So he smiled and he raised his finger and he said, La ilaha illallah, and then he died. So this is from the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can make dhikr, even when you don't want to make dhikr, you can make the dhikr of Allah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to seal our lives with La ilaha illallah and to make us from those who remember Him. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.